Welcome to an episode of Behind the Scenes, a weekly program unveiling the biggest political developments in Somali politics and the wider Horn of Africa region. I'm Sultan Mohammed, your host and co-producer here on Horfada Media alongside Suleiman Hashi. On this week's program, the Somali Federal Parliament elects a new president as Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud is announced the victor following tense elections in Mogadishu. With a landslide victory, what actually unfolded in Afisioni? Also on the program, what does this election result mean for Somalia as the country enters a new chapter in its state-building journey? That is the topic on our program today. We hope you find this program very informative. Please like, share, and for similar content, do subscribe to Horfada Media. Also, do subscribe to Horfada Media Group's second channel, known as Horfada TV, where you can find exclusive content, including Mahahi Saleh, among others. And last but not least, do follow myself, Sultan Mohammed, Suleiman Hashi, Yasin Abdi, and the wider Horfada Media team on our social media platforms that should appear on the screen any moment. Let's get straight into it. After nearly 2 years of dithering and delay by various factions, the Somali election has successfully concluded, with former President Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud elected as the new president. The dithering and delay can be perceived as a result of the power yielded to federal member states by the federal government led by the outgoing Prime Minister Mohamed Hussein Roble. The ability to decide the election time, the ability to influence state election implementation teams and candidates allowed federal member state leaders to strategically yield exacerbated control over the federal elections as never seen before. Examples of this included elections that occurred in Gedo, which saw a direct split between Gerbahare and El Waq, as well as elections in Jowhar and Bosaso, which also saw controversy and delay. We saw multiple deadlines set by the National Consultative Council composed of the outgoing Prime Minister Mohamed Hussein Roble and federal member state leaders, only to be bypassed as if it means nothing. We saw continuous statements released by international partners condemning the delay. It was a rollercoaster election, to say the least. However, this election has also been the most divisive election seen in Somali history. It has split the nation into two major warring factions that nearly tore down the fabric of our society. From politicians to the public, derogatory, hateful terminology was used to describe one another in a vicious cycle of hatred. Both groups claimed patriotism, accusing the other of being against Somalia. However, the reality is that this nation is shared amongst all of us, irrespective of political opinion. Therefore, the best approach to find a solution to this major problem is to find a common ground rather than sit at opposite fences. One common denominator amongst all Somalis is the yearning for a one-person, one-vote election system, which has not happened in the country since 1969, despite even that election being smeared with tribalism and corruption. The push for direct elections for the people, for the Somali people to decide the country and the nation that they want, is a unifying point to consider amongst all of us. Now, the election that took place in Afisioni showed one thing. All politicians Somalis thought hated each other, Somalis thought were enemies, were actually seen laughing together, having small talk, sharing jokes. We saw images of Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud and Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo, once considered arch enemies, now having a laugh. We saw pictures of Hassan Ali Khaire and his former president Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo having a laugh. This is politics. It's a game, and the reality is that these politicians Somalis have been essentially dying for was in complete vain. We saw the battles in Mogadishu, we saw what was happening in Gedo, we saw all these things happening, and the reality is that people died, people protested, people were injured, and people spent day and night on Twitter and social media fighting for people who they thought were on their side and were enemies from the other side or whatever else you want to consider it, only to find out that all these people are actually just playing a game of cat and mouse and politics to get to the top, much like House of Cards. And that's the reality. Now, let's actually take a closer look at what actually unfolded in this election. Now, for many, the favored winner was the now former president Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo. Of course, Denny, former president of Puntland, Hassan Ali Khaire, former prime minister of Somalia, and Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud, the actual victor, were also seen as major favorites, also Sharif Sheikh Ahmed. The election lasted 3 rounds, with Hassan Sheikh making a major comeback on the 3rd round to beat the incumbent president Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo by 27 votes, with Hassan Sheikh receiving 110 and Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo receiving 83. The first round saw Saeed Deni take the lead, with the second round being between Hassan Ali Khaira, Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo, Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud, and Saeed Deni. Many were shocked at the elimination of Sharif Sheikh Ahmed within the first round. The former president seemed to have a strong support base as he led the council of presidential candidates, and his party, Himulaqaran, seemed to be, much stronger than many essentially perceived. That they had won MPs in parliament, and of course they were much more respected within the council of presidential candidates than other candidates. Now, aside from the 6-7 candidates that received some kind of vote, most of the 39 candidates actually received 0 votes. Abdurrahman Abdul Shakur, another major figure in the election, was eliminated in the first round as well, receiving only 15 votes. Now, unconfirmed reports are suggesting that Khaira's campaign requested the support of Farmajo during the second round, citing the unlikelihood of Farmajo victory, which was rejected by the Farmajo camp allegedly. This would see Farmajo enter the third round, and it is reported that this action directly resulted in Khaira throwing his weight behind Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud. And similarly, of course, Saeed Deni threw his weight behind Mahmoud, as he said in his announcement speech of presidential candidacy in Garowe. His intention to remove Farmajo from office was his main goal. The combination of the two, coupled with successful campaigning by Mahmoud's camp, including Senator Abshir Ahmed, that helped push Hassan Sheikh past the finishing line. For some, this is a major victory, particularly those that supported the opposition and the removal of President Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo. And for others, it was a terrible field day, with the supporters of Nawad Iyanolo suffering a defeat that was never expected amongst them. The reality is that Somalia now has a new president, and it seems to have a total opposite approach in many areas, including security and foreign policy. While some may seem disheartened by the result, we Somalis have always been Democrats, and much like the first democratic transfer of power in sub-Saharan Africa in 1967 between Somali President Aden Adde and the new Somali president at the time, Abdurrashid Sharmake, and much like Hassan Sheikh did in 2017 for Farmajo, currently Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo passed the national baton to the next leader of our nation. This is the beauty of Somali democracy at its finest. However, some have argued for quote-unquote reconciliation following this election. I wholeheartedly disagree. Somalia doesn't necessarily need reconciliation. It is okay to have opposing opinions. Just because one respects Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud or one respects Farmajo does not mean that one changes opinion on what is best for their nation. A robust opposition is always needed in a democracy, much like we've seen against Farmajo and will most likely see against Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud. The commonality between all of us is the betterment of Somalia. The question is how and what approach is best, and that is the particular question that many are battling about. Now, what is the difference between Hassan Sheikh and Farmajo in terms of politics? Well, firstly, one must understand what kind of politician Hassan Sheikh is. Aside from various accusations of corruption in his first tenure, Hassan Sheikh has a more diplomatic approach to foreign and internal policies. He focuses more on education and rebuilding foundational institutions of Somali federalism. He played a key role, for example, in the foundation of both Galmudug and Hirshabelle states of Somalia. He built relations with foreign international partners that will be pivotal to Farmajo's reconstruction of Somalia's security apparatus, including Turkey. The main difference between Hassan Sheikh and Farmajo is centered on the political spectrum. Farmajo can be considered more towards the right wing, focusing heavily on Somali sovereignty at all costs, taking strong, robust, unilateral, decisive action against what the Somali government perceives as threats, including Kenyan aggression. Farmajo's foreign policy, including his handling of foreign diplomats, revitalized the power of the presidency, which was once summoned to Halane. His focus on patriotism was important in rekindling the love Somalis once had for their nation, and this is both sides, both Nawad Iyanolo and the opposition groups, because both began to become more passionate about their country, whichever perspective you had. So now, what is next for the new president? Firstly, the issue of one person, one vote is at the forefront of this government's to-do list. The delay has gone on for far too long, and Somalis deserve a final decision to decide their leader. The second issue facing the president is the completion of the constitution, which is yet to be completed. It was formed in 2000 and now 2022, and it's been 22 years and it's still in its same position. Number 3, the issue of Garbahara remains a heated one following the events that unfolded during the elections of 2022. The sidelining of Gedo, particularly of the Garbahara region of Gedo, has created friction in Jubaland, to say the least. The next issue facing Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud is the issue of Ahlul Sunnah, which continues to re-emerge in Galmudug and currently now saw battles unfold in Dorsamareb and Balad. Another issue is Al-Shabaab, which continues to be a threat, albeit their threat levels have faltered, of course, over the years. With, we see occasional bombings in Mogadishu, in Beledweyne. We've seen these, particularly during the election period, and this is to dishearten Somalis. But on a general basis, Al-Shabaab doesn't seem to pose the major threat it once did, particularly once upon a time it actually controlled Mogadishu. And the continued droughts that ravage the nation and costs hundreds of thousands of lives per year. Now, Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, the new president, has met with the committee that's in charge of the drought and received updates on what the country is doing. But this remains a major issue. And how can the country overcome these droughts? And how can this country use its technology, its resources to essentially build up using these materials is a question for Hassan Sheikh Mohamud to figure out. And finally, the continued assault on Somali sovereignty, which could be one of the bigger issues he's facing. The reality is that the political dynamic Hassan Sheikh left behind in 2017 is long dead. Somalia has been pushed to the forefront of Horn Africa politics, with the two giants of China and the US feasting their eyes upon the strategically located Somalia. Kenya and Ethiopia continue to eye Somali territory and waters, while the UAE continues to eye Somali ports, with already having Bosaso and Berbera in the mix, and allegedly now looking at Kismayo. For Hassan Sheikh to succeed in this extremely hostile environment, he must exert a strong foreign policy and continue the work done by Farmajo, not just in foreign policy, but also within the security apparatus and strengthening the central government, which currently is overpowered by federal member states. The positive thing about Hassan Sheikh Mohamud is that he's already served as president. He does have experience. Whether one agrees or not with his political ideologies, whether one trusts Hassan Sheikh Mohamud or not, we can all accept that he does have the experience. And it is a positive thing, rather than having a president who literally has no experience and has never held office, which would have been quite detrimental to Somalia's state building process. I do wish the new president a best of luck in his new role, and I pray Allah guides him through this difficult time in Somali history.